So we're starting here in line 195, and we start with this phrase talibus insidiis, which means by such tricks. So talibus meaning such, insidiis meaning tricks, and this phrase is ablative plural, which is why it means by such tricks. And then que here meaning and then we have another ablative noun, arte, so by the art or by the skill of the lying, so per iuri is genitive case, of the lying, of the deceit. And then another genitive, synonis, of synon. So by such tricks and by the skill of the lying of synon. And then we finally get to our subject, which is res, which means the thing or the matter, or perhaps in this instance, the story. And then our main verb is credita. Now this is short for credita est, so it's perfect passive. You can also see it has this feminine ending, credita, rather than creditus, and that's because the subject, res, is feminine. So the story, credita est, was believed. And then we have another que at the end of a word, meaning and. And then capti, again, this is a perfect passive. And here it's a shortened version of capti sumus. So it means we were captured. And the we here refers to Aeneas and all of the Trojans in general. So we were captured. And then we have an ablative plural, dolis, we were captured by wiles, by tricks, if you like. And there's our que again. And then more ablatives here. We were captured by coactis lacrimis. Now, lacrimis are tears, and coactis is agreeing with that. It's a perfect passive participle from cogo, to force. So coactis lacrimis are forced tears. In other words, these are Sinon's fake tears, right? He's not really crying, he's telling them a lie, and so he's pretending to cry to make his story persuasive. Okay, so we were captured by wiles, dolis, and by forced tears. Okay, and then in the next line, we have this word quos. Now, quos means whom. It's from qui, but as you can see from the ending, it's accusative. So this quos is referring to us, the Trojans, but it's the object. So we need to see who might be the subject here. So we whom, neither neque, and now we get our subjects. So neither Tydides. Now this is what's called a patronymic. It means a patronymic is where you refer to somebody as son of someone. So Tydides means son of Tydeus. And that refers, by the way, to a Greek hero at Troy called Diomedes. So we whom neither the son of Tydeus nor Laricean Achilles, right? Laricean means of Larissa, referring to his birthplace, and then here's his name, Achilles. So there's our first subject, Tydides. There's our second subject, Achilles, and we have two more actually. We have Anni Decem, 10 years, so not 10 years, known Anni Decem, and not known, and here's our last subject, mille carinae, 1,000 ships. Carina literally is the keel of a ship, but it can also be used to mean a ship in general, just like navis. So if we put all this together, what it means is we whom neither the son of Tydeus nor Laricean Achilles nor 10 years nor 1,000 ships conquered, domuere. So the verb of all of these subjects is domuere, and this is a poetic form which is equivalent to, in prose, domuerunt, right? So in normal Latin it would be domuerunt, third person plural, perfect tense, right? So in other words, Aeneas, as the narrator here, is saying, we Trojans who were not defeated by all of these mighty things, the great hero Diomedes, the great hero Achilles, 10 years of war, an invasion of 10,000 ships. None of these things were able to overpower us Trojans, and yet we succumbed to the tricks of this random Greek liar called Sinon, right? So there's something sort of quite extraordinary and devastating for the Trojans about the fact they can survive so much and yet they are brought down by something so insignificant, and something so kind of underhand and tricksy as well. They're not defeated in proper open battle, they are defeated by lies and tricks in the end. Okay, so then we go into the next line 199. We start with hic, which can mean here, when it has a long I, it can mean here. It can also mean at this point, which I think is the meaning in this instance. So at this point, Aliud, another, Maius. Now, Maius here means bigger or greater. And it's neuter, so you've got Aliud and Maius both neuter. And I think we're supposed to treat this as a noun, basically. So another greater thing, right? So we add in the word thing with Maius, because this is the subject, in fact. So another greater thing, and not just a greater thing, but also a thing which is magis tremendum, more terrible, by much, multo. So multo here means by much or by far. So another greater thing, and magis tremendum, more terrible, by far, multo. And then the verb that goes with all of this is obicitur, which is present passive. So is thrust upon us. Something like that. So another thing is thrust upon us. And this verb obicitur is followed by the dative case, right? So is thrust upon who? Is thrust upon the miseris. That's our dative. So is thrust upon the wretched ones. And the wretched ones are us Trojans, right? So another greater thing and more terrible by far is thrust upon us wretched ones. And, atque, it disturbs, turbat. So again, the subject is still aliud maius, and then another verb with it is turbat. So this thing disturbs our improvida pectora. So our unforeseeing hearts. Unforeseeing in the sense that they're not figuring out the plot. They're not realizing the danger that is looming upon them. Okay. And then we have a new subject in line 201, which is Laocoon. Okay. And notice that his name is actually 4 separate syllables. La-o-ko-on. And that's quite important when it comes to thinking about the rhythm of these lines for the scansion exercises that the IB asks you to do. So la okoon, 4 syllables, la okoon. And then in between these commas, we're told a little bit about who he is. So he is the priest, the sacerdos, having been drawn, ductus. So ductus is the PPP, perfect passive participle, from duco, which can mean to lead, or in this instance, to draw. So having been drawn, by lot, sorte. Sorte is ablative, by lot. That basically means by chance. So in other words, you put a few stones in a bag or something, shake the bag, and then pull out a stone, and whoever's name is written on the stone, that's the person who has to be the priest. So he's been chosen by chance rather than by some kind of election or whatever. So the priest, having been drawn by lot for Neptune. So Neptuno is dative case for Neptune, and he is the god of the sea. So he's a priest, having been drawn by lot for Neptune. And now we've got our subject, Leokoon. Now we need the main verb, which is maktabat, imperfect tense. You can tell from the BA in the ending. So he was sacrificing, or you could say he began to sacrifice, because he doesn't actually finish this action. He began to sacrifice and then the object is ingentem taurum, a huge bull. Now ad plus accusative can mean to or towards, but that's usually if you're moving towards somewhere. If it's just a doing verb, then it can also mean at, right? So he was sacrificing a huge bull at the solemnis aras. Now these are going together, the adjective solemnis and the noun aras. They're both accusative plural. And solemnis can mean solemn, or you could say ceremonial or something. So at the ceremonial altars. So that tells us where he was doing this sacrifice, at the ceremonial altars. One small point here, solemnis with a long I, this looks like it's dative or ablative plural, but it's actually not, because this is a special verse form, which you'll see a lot, or a poetic form. This is the equivalent of solemnes in prose. So in other words, that es ending that you've met for third declension nouns like reges or naves or whatever, that es ending, which is nominative or accusative plural, in poetry is often is instead. So solemnis aras in prose would be solemnes aras. Okay, autem then in the next line, but eke, look. And then we have a new subject, which is gemini is an adjective, and then angues is the noun. So gemini means twin, like Gemini, and then angues are snakes, right? So twin snakes, are tenedo, are plus ablative, from tenedos. And then you have per plus accusative, meaning through. So through the tranquilla alta, through the peaceful depths. And then there's a little phrase in brackets, a little kind of interruption or interjection from Aeneas as the narrator. He says, horresco, that means I shudder or I quake. Referens, recalling it or relaying it, reporting it. I shudder to recall it. I quake recalling it. And then we have an ablative phrase, immensis orbibus, so with vast coils, right? So immensis, this gives us the word immense in English, and then orbibus, which is a coil here. It can mean anything circular, so it gives us words like orb or orbit in English. So with immense or huge or vast coils. And then we get to the main verb. So the subject is the angues, the snakes. And then what they do is they incumbunt, which means they skim over. And this verb is followed by the dative case, which is pelago. So they skim over the sea. So pelago, this is just a more poetic word for mare, the sea, right? So they skim over the sea. And que, together, pariter, together, like words like parity in English, together, they tendunt, they head, ad litora, towards the shore. Now, litora is grammatically plural, but in English we would just translate it as singular. In poetry, the difference between singular and plural is often very flexible because the poet often just chooses whichever one is better for the rhythm of the line. So you kind of just have to use your judgment sometimes to decide which one makes more sense in the context. So here I would translate this as singular, I think. Ad litora, towards the shore. Okay, then in line 206, I would start with quorum, and I would translate quorum as their, Their, right? This is what is called a connecting relative. So literally it means whose or of whom, but it's referring to the snakes from the previous sentence. So in English, we can't really say whose, we would have to say their. And the word going with that is pectora. So their chests, their chests, and then agreeing with that is a PPP, a perfect passive participle, arrecta, having been raised, right? So their chests having been raised. Inter plus accusative means amid or among, and then fluctus is accusative plural of a fourth declension noun, fluctus. So among or amid the surges, right? So their chests having been raised amid the surges, and quae, and then you have an adjective sanguinei, meaning blood red, and then that's agreeing with the noun eubai, which are crests, right? So, and their blood red crests. And then we get our verb, right? So the subjects are the pectora, the chests, and the eubai, the crests. And then the verb for those two subjects is superant, which means overpower, or perhaps in this context, rise above. And then the object is undas, so rise above the waves. And then we have another subject, which is this phrase, caetera pars. So caetera meaning the remaining, and pars meaning part, right? So the remaining part. Legit, now lego can mean to read or choose, but in this context, it has a very particular meaning, skims, right? So the remaining part skims over the pontum, the sea, right? That's another poetic word for the sea. The remaining part skims the sea, pone, behind, and quae, winds, that's the verb sinuat, and winds the immensa terga, that's the object, the vast backs, and winds the vast backs, and then volumine is an ablative noun, meaning with a coil. Or again, we could translate this as plural here, so with coils. And so remember here, the subject is the caetera pars, or the pars caetera, the remaining part. So the remaining part of the snake's body skims the sea behind and winds the vast backs with coils. So we're given this very graphic, very vivid description of the movement of these two snakes who are kind of emerging through the sea from the island of Tenedos. Right, and then we get to, in line 209, we get to a new subject, which is sonitus, right? So a sound, and then the verb is fit, which just means happens or occurs. A sound occurs, and then we have an ablative absolute. So sallow literally means salt, but here it's yet another word for the sea, right? So a sound occurs with the sea foaming, spumante, right? So this is an ablative absolute with our ablative noun and our ablative participle, right? You can recognize the present participle from the letters NT in it, right? So a sound occurs with the sea foaming. And now, right? So que meaning and then yam meaning now, and now. The main verb is tenebant, right, which means they were holding, or in this context, I would say they were reaching. The subject, presumably, is the snakes. So they were reaching, and the object is arwa, so they were reaching the fields. And que, and then you've got a PPP, perfect passive participle here, suffecti, which means having been tinged. And then you've got something called an accusative of respect, telling you where they were tinged. So this is a very particular use of the accusative case. They were tinged in their ardentis oculos. Now again, this is an accusative phrase, so ardentis here, this is a poetic version of ardentes. So they were tinged in their blazing eyes. Notice again the nt in ardentis tells you that it's a present participle. So they were reaching the fields and tinged in their ardentis oculos, in their blazing eyes, with blood, so sanguine is ablative, et igni, and with fire, another ablative. So they were tinged in their blazing eyes with blood and fire. And then we get to our main verb, lambebant, right? The ba there tells you it's imperfect. They were licking. And then the object of that is sibila. So sibila means hissing, as in the word sibilance. So they were licking their hissing ora, mouths. They were licking their hissing mouths with, and then here in the middle we have an ablative phrase, with quivering tongues. So vibrantibus means quivering. And again, you can see from the nt in the middle that it's a present participle. You can also see that it gives us words like vibrate or vibration in English. So with quivering, and then linguis, again, ablative plural, and a lingua is a tongue, right? So again, in English, there are words that come from this. So if you're bilingual, then you speak two tongues or two languages. So they were licking their hissing mouths with quivering tongues.